You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Hi, it's the Work It podcast with me, Tiffany Sng. Now, a couple of years ago, I came across this phrase, people pleaser. Well, that's someone who is constantly trying to meet the needs and desires and opinions of others. So they prioritize how others feel and in the process, neglect their own feelings. Now, in a work setting, what does it look like? Perhaps going to lunch with people you don't really like, or maybe saying yes to a project even if your own load is heavy. So a bit of confession. From the time I was young, this described me to a T, and it spilled into work too. But as I grew older and I got burned on several occasions, I became much more aware of how this trait was affecting me. Now, in the studio with me today is Eunice Sng. She's researching and writing an article on this very topic for CNA Today. Hi, Eunice.
Hi.
So I want to ask you straight off the bat, are you a people pleaser? Do you identify with that?
No, I'm not really a people pleaser, but I have encountered friends or colleagues or people that I've met in my everyday life who have shared their struggles with me in instances where they find it difficult to say no to people.
So when you say you're not a people pleaser, has it always been that case since you were young?
Yeah, I think I've always been quite clear about my boundaries and I prioritize my mental health. But I think for me, it's the opposite problem because I need to communicate it in a way that wouldn't upset people sometimes. And sometimes people get offended and I have to tone down and communicate in a way that makes them agreeable and still okay with my decision.
Yeah. Not that they need to like you, but that they need to understand where you're coming from, right? Yeah, which I think it's good that we're having this conversation because obviously we sit on different ends of the spectrum. I think I'm at this stage where I can call myself a recovering people pleaser. So I wouldn't say that people's opinions don't matter to me, but I would say that maybe I'm recovering because I'm a bit more aware that these things do matter to me. But at the same time, I know that it's something that I can try and work my way out of it. Maybe we can talk about first, what's the difference between being a people pleaser and someone who's just nice and easy to work with? When is it clearly a problematic thing?
Okay, so the very definition of people pleasing is foregoing your own wants and needs for the benefit of others. You can also be a positive addition to the workplace with a positive work attitude, such as being helpful, being a team player, without having to compromise on your boundaries and needs. So I think that's the key difference. So that is still being helpful, but just being firm on your boundaries as well. So the difference is how much the behavior infringes on your own limits and your own values and capacity. That is the harmful part that makes someone become a people pleaser.
Yeah, I came across this self-help book, Stop People Pleasing and Find Your Power. And this author's name is Hayley McGee. And she was saying that it could be very simple examples like being unwilling to express your needs, like time off, or asking for an extended deadline when there is more work added to your load. Things also like picking up the slack for your colleagues on an assignment or group project. Maybe when I was younger, if colleagues said, oh, actually, I can't handle it, I don't want to do it, then I would be like, oh, okay, if I can do it, then why not? But it was chipping away at my self-identity, and more importantly, it was chipping away at my own personal time because I was spending so much time at work trying to pick up other people's slack, right? Another thing which can be quite dangerous that Hayley McGee was saying is giving in to societal pressures. So like code switching as a person of color or being soft-spoken as a woman. And yeah, I think both of us being women, we do see that like sometimes there are maybe other women who might take a more deferential attitude when they are talking to men in their teams or even in boardrooms, right?
I met this financial consultant. She was talking about how she has to meet clients all the time and they make a lot of requests on her. And sometimes this would manifest in the form of asking her to schedule meetings as late as like 10 p.m. at night, which is beyond her working hours. And even though she feels uncomfortable because she has to compromise on her personal time and she has to meet a lot of people in the daytime as well. So it would tire her a lot. But because she wants to build her clientele base and to maintain the relationship with her clients so that she can have more business, so she would please them and say yes. And this happened a lot, especially in her earlier years, like when she was a more junior associate. And she had to build like her first 100 clients. That's why she felt pressure to do a lot of people pleasing and doing things according to their demands. But now that she's like a manager, she's trying to learn how to set firmer boundaries for herself.
And also for her team as well, right?
Yeah.
Because with somebody who has gone through something like this, I think it would be rather disastrous if they haven't learned from the lessons that they have had to go through. But you brought a very good point, which is I don't think that this happens only for younger workers. It's not an age thing. I think it's maybe like more of an experience thing. They needed to just have more experience in the job to be able to have a say of like, okay, I'm very confident, I'm very comfortable in my own skin, so I can draw certain boundaries.
I think as a young worker myself, I feel that we don't have experience of the scenarios that we can come across in the working world, so we might not know how to handle them. But as we get familiar with different kind of situations that can happen, like in dealing with people, in your requests, in interviews, and then we can slowly develop the ability to know how to communicate, when to say no, and what your priorities are. But at the early stage, I think it can be quite easy to just say yes to everything, and that will lead to like burnout.
Some people might say that there's nothing wrong with people pleasing. I'm happy, I'm okay with it. But when it comes to the workplace, is there sort of a slippery slope when it comes to saying yes the first time, the second time?
So if you excessively give in to requests from others, then you might find it harder and harder to say no or reject future requests. Because when other people realize that you are someone that they can depend on for help, they are likely to keep reaching out to you and asking you for help. And this is where the dynamics of the relationship in the professional world may reach a point where the support becomes very one-sided and it will cause an imbalance in the efforts put in the workplace.
So what happens if you are not assertive about drawing very clear boundaries, and how does that affect your mental health?
So a counselor that I spoke to, this is Janet Gay from Intellect, she said that saying yes all the time can diminish their sense of autonomy, making employees feel powerless over their workload. And in the long run, this can lead to resentment and disengagement from their work, which would further exacerbate the strain and stress that they feel.
I think when you are trying to people please, part of it is that it stems from tagging your worth to your job. That means that your identity is very much linked to your job. A very good example I would say is, if my boss gives me this job, it means he or she thinks I can do this job. And it's almost like feeling that like I'm the only person in this team who the boss trusts. And there is a sense of inflated self-worth. So it's not just about protecting my own mental health, but sometimes also being more reflective of where it comes from. So another element we can talk a little bit about is how do people pleasers become people pleasers? In your research, are there other things that has come up?
Okay, so they all said that people pleasing is not a personality, but people actually grow up with certain tendencies or contexts that make them more prone to being agreeable to others. So some of the reasons can include growing up with overly critical caregivers, and it will lead to them seeking approval through complying with their demands. Or in Asian cultures such as ours, we emphasize deference to authority or seniors, and then reinforcing the idea that saying no is rude or selfish. And it also can stem from the fact that some individuals just have a higher sense of empathy and sensitivity, and they naturally feel deeply attuned to others' emotions and discomforts.
Yes.
So it just makes it hard to set boundaries without feeling very guilty about themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think quite a big part of me falls under the last category that you're talking about. I do sometimes struggle with that. If I see somebody in an uncomfortable position, my default mode is to try and take them out of that situation. So if that means taking extra work on behalf of them, then I would say yes to that. But you, on the other hand, would not, right? Like we were saying earlier on. Has that ever cost you some relationships before?
Yes. It hasn't really damaged like the connection completely.
Yeah.
But they would have a conversation with me afterwards, saying that I wish maybe you could have taken more initiative to do certain things or help me out when I was struggling instead of just doing what you were told to do, but also actively reach out and help them with things that they need the help with.
Let's talk a little bit about setting boundaries. I think there is a fine line between over setting boundaries and setting the right boundaries.
Yeah.
One should never feel that they should always say no to any other tasks that's given to them, because some of these tasks, even though it may fall outside of our job scope, they could help our boss ask for a promotion for us in the next promotion cycle, or the boss really do feel that I would like to challenge you a little bit more. This will be helpful to you. But I think setting boundaries in general can be quite scary because you feel that you aren't entitled to any of this, right? So let's talk about how we can try and set clearer boundaries for yourself. How to say no if you are a people pleaser.
So the counselors told me that a good way to build confidence in saying no is through practice. You can actually practice in front of the mirror or like a trusted one until it feels less unnatural to verbalize these boundaries and needs. And then what exactly you can say, they suggested using a polite and firm tone or saying no.
Like such as, did they give you examples?
So they say, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm currently at full capacity, or I won't be able to take this on at the moment, but I can connect you with someone who might be able to help. Or, given my current workload, I won't be able to meet the deadline. Can we adjust the timeline? Then they emphasize that practicing empathy first can help to maintain the rapport. And acknowledging the other person's perspective with phrases like, I see where you're coming from. As much as I would like to help out, can make the response feel more considerate while still setting a firm boundary.
I can see a lot of people at this point of time stopping the podcast, rewind back, jotting down what you're saying, because these are good ways of trying to get a conversation going, right? Another thing is trying to reframe the idea of setting boundaries. So what I mean by that is seeing that boundaries can actually help you be more effective as an employee. If you have only this amount of time that you have prioritized for work, then you want every task to be optimally done. And what is the optimal time that can help you to get the job done? So if I need 4 hours to finish my task and do it well, then these 4 hours need to be protected. I think also the other thing is that people don't like to have uncomfortable conversations with their bosses or colleagues, which is why what you said earlier on that you picked up from the counselors really helped. Because a lot of times, people would rather keep the peace. So let's talk about some tips on how we can be less of a people pleaser towards our boss, be more of a team player.
Maybe in your tone of voice, you can be extra mindful, like to avoid getting defensive or aggressive and avoid shutting down, and maybe pepper it more with some phrases to express appreciation for thinking of them for certain tasks.
But I can imagine it's quite tiring, right? To always have to caveat your sentences. Always saying, I appreciate that you thought of me. I appreciate that you took time to explain to me. I appreciate this, I appreciate that. But actually in your mind, you're just like, stop. I'm not really appreciative.
I think that's the reality of
that is the reality
of like working in a workplace where there's a hierarchy also. And I think bosses also appreciate it if you're polite to them.
I would say that you don't have to overdo the whole appreciative words because you want to be as authentic as possible, right? It's important to help your boss understand what you would like to work towards. So firstly, you need to ask yourself, what do you want, right, out of this conversation? Are you asking for more pay? Are you asking for a promotion? Are you asking to be treated fairly compared to your team members? And I think a good way to do that is to show evidence that you deserve what you have just presented to your boss. So one good tip I would say is to keep a record of victories in the year that you can bring up during your performance review. So in one other episode that we had earlier on, we talked about performance review. I said that what I have done is have a Word document on my laptop. So every time, let's say, for example, someone writes a nice comment on a particular episode that we have done, then I'll screenshot that comment and then I'll leave it there. So that when it comes to like performance review, I can say, actually, we have had these podcasts that we have done. It resonated very well. The other thing when setting boundaries, like what you were mentioning, make it about work. Don't make it personal, right? So don't get aggressive or defensive. It helps to write down the areas that we are struggling with, whether it's about time management or it's about workload, then write solutions beside it. Because then you can say, okay, this is the problem, this is the solution.
Yeah, I think something else is to communicate your expectations early. So instead of rejecting them last minute, maybe you can tell them early that you cannot handle this assignment. Also maybe offer solutions. Suggest alternatives or like a different timeline that might work better for you but still get the task done.
it's not easy. I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast might be starting to reflect whether they are a bit like you, who is a non-people pleaser, and how do they set boundaries that don't offend people? Or they might think, oh, I'm more of a Tiffany who is a recovering people pleaser, and what can we do moving out of this very toxic environment?
Yeah.
But I think overall, the main thing is to be aware, to speak up about it, and to be brave, to not put yourself in a situation where you feel that your feelings are not important compared to the next person. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing with us. For more on this topic, Eunice's article is actually coming out this weekend on our CNA website. Have a read and feel free to let us know your thoughts, your struggles, or any advice that has actually worked for you. The team behind the Work It podcast is Crispina Robert, Junaini Johari, Joanne Chan, and Saye Win. Sound mixing is by Carrie Lim. I'm Tiffany, and this has been the Work It podcast. Bye for now.